Senate that if I had a question, if I needed advice, if I needed confirmation, that Senator McDaniel was the primary person that I was going to go to. Because, like he said, you don't trust everybody in politics. And I knew from the folks that have known Chris McDaniel for years and years and years that I could trust Chris McDaniel. And my election got so heated up, I'll tell you all a little funny story before we get started. I called Chris McDaniel and I had all kind of mail going out saying that I supported gay rights, abortion, I mean everything. I was the interim director at a Christian school at my church when all this mail was going out and I was running for office. And I called Chris and I said, Chris, I am running out of money. I've got to have some money. I'm putting stuff on my credit cards. And my husband's like, you can't stop now. You've gone too far. And then this personal email went out all over the county. And it got so bad, the last week I forgot I needed any money. And I never did even call Chris back. The next thing happened, I was elected. So, you know, God works in his own way. And sometimes things that hit you, that people think they're going to knock you down with it. It's just a testament to how strong that God can make you if you're willing to do what's right. It's not always easy. Senator McDaniel and I know that we're not taking the easy road. I can promise you that. We wouldn't be getting the shots taken at us if we were taking the easy road and if we weren't hitting the nerve of the fabric of what we know that we need to protect in the state of Mississippi. When you push the right buttons in the liberal derangement syndrome and the establishment derangement syndrome starts working overtime, you know that you're doing the right thing for the people of the state of Mississippi. So I can't say how fortunate you are to have Senator McDaniel to represent you in Jones County. He's well known all over the state, and his reputation precedes him. And it's been a great honor to be able to have a mentor and to be able to work with a man of the integrity, the intelligence, and if I had a word to describe Chris McDaniel, it would probably be smooth, because Senator McDaniel is confident in himself, he's confident in his faith, his knowledge, and he knows where he is in his life, and that's what makes him so effective, I think, in a lot of ways. So now, what you invited me here to talk about is Common Core. You've only begun to hear it start becoming a little talked about in the news and on social media and stuff, because people are just now, because it's hitting the schools in full implementation, people are just now starting to know that it's here. Only some bureaucrats and a few educators, a few educational establishment people back in 2010 when it was adopted, they were the only people that was aware of it. We have sent a 4-page letter to the State Department of Education asking some very pertinent questions regarding some of the aspects of Common Core, the federal government's role in education. We have not gotten the results of that letter. You can go to MississippiPep.com and look at the letter, or probably go to any of our Facebook pages if you want to read the letter that we sent to the Mississippi Department of Education. And when we do get an answer, if we get an answer, we will certainly publish that. But Common Core came about in 2010. That's when the State Department of Education adopted Common Core, was on June 25th of 2010. You have probably heard that it is state-led, it's not federally controlled, not federally mandated, and in a backdoor way, that can be semi-accurate. But the way Common Core got into the states is, the Obama stimulus plan had a program called Race to the Top, okay? Race to the Top was over $4 billion that the federal government, through Arnie Duncan and the Education Administration, laid out to the states that you can compete for this big piece of the pie if you will do this, this, and this. Okay? 2 of the requirements for the local, the states to compete for that chunk of money was, number 1, to adopt, quote, college and career ready standards and to replace the standards that they already had in the states for math and English. And the second big thing, there were 4 things, but the big 2 were the college and career ready standards, and the second thing was for the states to set up what is called a longitudinal data system to collect data. Those were 2 requirements, 2 major requirements for the states to compete for this Race to the Top grant, to agree that they would set up a data system and to, adopt college and career ready standards. Well, just so happened that a group had been writing and had begun to draft a set of, quote, college and career ready standards called Common Core. This Common Core development was the result of a collaboration between the Bill Gates Foundation, the Council for State Chief School Officers, or Chief State School Officers, which is basically the National Superintendent's Club, and the third entity was the National Governors Association. So back in 2010, your governor and your state school board are the ones who signed on the dotted line and signed you up for Common Core as a condition to compete for those billions of dollars in Race to the Top funds, of which Mississippi did not get any. If you look at the minutes of the June 25th state board meeting, it basically says that it was unanimously adopted, and the reason was because of, quote, imminent peril to the public welfare and the potential loss of substantial federal funds from Race to the Top. So that was your primary reason. It's as clear as a bell in the board minutes. Some of you that I know have already gone back and looked at the board minutes. Part of that was in the letter that we sent to the Department of Education, because the rub and the talking points from the educational establishment has been we did this to increase standards. They did this primarily to compete for that federal money. The standards were not even finished being written when the majority of states adopted it. And if I'm not mistaken, Mississippi was the first state to sign on. So, you know, we didn't get the federal money, but we got stuck with a national set of standards that's driven and controlled by an outside group that I just named, from the Gates Foundation, the Chief State School Officers, National Council of Chief State School Officers, and of course, the Republican Governors Association had that collaboration. But a couple of the troubling points with the Common Core state standards is the way that the testing was set up for the states to participate in Common Core. There were two separate consortia that were funded by both the Gates Foundation and by the federal government to develop these standards, the test for these standards. One was called PARC, P-A-R-C-C, and the other was called Smarter Balance Consortium. Mississippi's a member of PARC. So PARC, the consortium group, is the one who's developing the test, and anybody who's in education knows that high stakes testing, whatever's on that test is going to drive the curriculum. So you hear that, well, you can use whatever curriculum you want to maintain these standards, but whatever's on those tests is what those teachers are going to teach to. So that's going to, tests are going to drive whatever curriculum that you use. And we've already seen some problems with some of the sample test items that have been put out to the schools. We just saw last week that Governor Nathan Deal in Georgia, he sent a letter to his state board and said that he wanted them to unadopt certain portions of Common Core based on some of the sample test items in English language arts that infuriated parents. I don't know what the details of those sample test items. That was not published. It was published in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution last week that Governor Deal was quite alarmed, and then some parents were infuriated in Georgia based on some of the sample English language arts questions that went home. So we're seeing in some of the sample questions and some of the things that are being used to implement Common Core do not align with what I would call Mississippi's core values. We see some books, some exemplary texts that are listed, not mandated, but are listed as a suggested text in some of the lists in Common Core that are quite graphic, even pornographic, have extreme sexual content. We see some of the books that are listed in the exemplary text list that are communist sympathizing. I've looked at several books that don't paint the U.S. in a very good light, and I'm not for censorship at all. Don't get me wrong, but there is an appropriate content for a high school student to be reading. Okay, film does not belong in the high schools in Mississippi. I mean, that's just it for me. And some of the stuff that's on the exemplary text list is just plain film, if you just want to know the truth about it. And it was very, very hard for me to read some of these selections out of this book, this one particular book, and I certainly would not want my 11th grade daughter reading this book in class. And the thing is, Common Core has been touted as, oh, it's just the standards. It's just a set of standards. Well, there's a lot of controversy over just the standards. We have Dr. Sandra Stotsky from the University of Arkansas, who is a content and standards expert, who is the Chief of Education Reform at the University of Arkansas. And we have Dr. James Milgram of Stanford University, who is also a mathematics consultant for NASA. And they both were on the Common Core Validation Committee. They both refused to sign off on the standards because of their poor quality. If you want to go out there on your computers and look up Dr. Stotsky or Dr. Milgram, they have written prolifically against Common Core because they say that the standards are poorer than standards that were already in place in many, many states. She wrote Massachusetts English Language Arts Standards. Massachusetts has consistently scored the highest in the nation on the National Assessment of Educational Progress in English Language Arts, and Massachusetts is known for having good language arts standards. And so some of the states that had really, really good standards, when they adopt Common Core, the standards were lower than what they have now. And we have a couple of instances where some of the kids in Mississippi in the lower elementary schools are being taught some things that, you know, they were once taught in one grade that they're being taught in the lower grade. And we have a couple of things that I've run across that are being taught earlier. But by and large, the reports that I'm getting from parents, not from some of the establishment, but from parents, are that their kids are doing the same thing that they did the year before, and not just like beginning review for the school year. In the Common Core standards, the Algebra 1, that 30% of our kids take in the 8th grade are accelerated kids. Common Core moves the formal Algebra 1 back into 9th grade. So what the kids in 8th grade are taking is called Common Core Math for 8th, or Common Core Math for 7th. And it was adopted and implemented so fast that the schools are trying to scrape up and write curriculum that they really don't have. And a lot of kids don't. Some teachers don't use books anyway, have for a while, but in my opinion, a kid needs a math book. If they don't have anything else, they need a math book. I mean, there's no way a parent can help them if they don't have a math book with examples. So the kids in my district, generally most of them don't have math books, so they're having a time with that. But, you know, Dr. Milgram has basically said that there's a lot of scaffolding missing in the mathematics curriculum, and that there's, you know, it's moved to an experimental way of teaching geometry in the high school that was only tried back in Russia in the 50s with math prodigies, and it didn't work with them, and they scrapped it. So now our whole entire United States is going to learn geometry that way. There is nothing at all that you can find anywhere that is any type of proof, any type of field testing. There is no data out there, no scientific data that says Common Core is going to improve anything at all in public schools. It's all talking points. It's basically propaganda, in my opinion. And if you look at this little sheet that I gave you, this totally explains step by step a systematic federal takeover of public education. And it shows you each step by which the federal government manipulated the states, basically by dangling money and programs and waivers and things to be able to have basically total outside control. Even if it's through a testing consortium, they still have de facto control because the testing consortium answers to the federal government. And a huge problem with this Common Core is the fact that when we signed on for the Race to the Top grant and we got Common Core, we also got this data collection system. The Obama stimulus package gave every state in the nation, every state, the stimulus money to set up this state longitudinal data system. So between what we've seen with the NSA and the IRS, going into your personal life or listening to your cell phones, and we've just seen how one of our universities inadvertently emailed people's grades and social security numbers and, you know, out. This data collection system through this new movement, along with Common Core, basically, if you look into the federal government and you go to the Department of Education's website and you look up a report called Promoting Grit and Tenacity, it tells you about 20 to 30 data points that the federal government wants to collect through the school system, from your religion to your voting preferences to your personality to your medical history, all kinds of things. You know, what type of job you do. They want all this on kids from preschool through the workforce. And basically it's so that they can market you to whomever they think that would be interested in having your personal profile to market you, solicit you, or whatever. So we used to have something called FERPA laws, Federal Education Right to Privacy Act, and by bypassing Congress, if you look on the sheet, number 5, the executive branch in the Obama administration bypassed Congress to weaken federal privacy laws. So basically, through an executive order, we have now some exceptions to the FERPA laws. We used to have to be very, very careful with student data. Well, now, based on what's been done through the executive branch, you can just about do anything that they can justify to anybody that says they have an interest just about in your child's education. They can just about justify sharing your information with whomever. So, honestly, it's basically a scheme, a for-profit scheme for certain individuals, and it is a social reform agenda for other certain individuals, and it has kind of come together to be a perfect storm. You know, with different entities having different interests in making sure that this new way of educating children comes to pass. So we have some, you know, prominent Republicans that have supported this movement. We've got Jeb Bush and his Foundation for Excellence in Education out there promoting Common Core. We've had Mike Cudby join on the bandwagon. Well, some of Jeb Bush's employees I worked very hard with, and they worked alongside me whenever I wrote the 3rd grade literacy bill, because as a teacher I would have kids that were in 5th grade that couldn't read. So the one bill that I concentrated on and I felt like was worthwhile was to put a bill in that said if a 3rd grader cannot score on the lowest level on an achievement test, that they couldn't move to 4th grade unless they had some type of special situation. And I even put in the bill that they could have an alternate assessment, because I know kids can have a bad day. Anything can happen. So I did work with some of his employees on that piece of legislation, because he felt like that was the best thing that he did in Florida to improve reading in Florida, that was the #1 thing that had the most impact on Florida. Because Florida really excelled in reading under Governor Bush. But the reason why he's out, you know, promoting Common Core is if you look at the money trail, to be quite honest with you, you see the Gates Foundation has spread money all around to different foundations, to different testing development agencies. You see Pearson, who is developing the test and marketing the curriculum. So that's a huge conflict of interest. So we see a lot of different profit-driven decisions in this scheme, and it's basically exploiting the taxpayers, it's exploiting the students, it's exploiting the teachers in our school system, and it has caused us to basically right now have really no control over the standards that are taught in the schools in Mississippi. Because Common Core, when you sign on to it, it says you cannot alter these standards at all. You will teach these standards. And it says you cannot add more than 15% to what you're teaching above and beyond these standards in math and English language arts. So that's a huge red light to me when they said you can't add more than 15% to what you're teaching. So besides the objectionable material that's been found in some of the suggested reading lists and some of the sample test items, and you know, the warnings from these professionals that know about standards and that know about content, it's all been ignored by a lot of people in the state of Mississippi. And once some of the conservatives started hearing from their people, because their kids are experiencing it in the school systems, we started paying attention. Because when parents call us and say, look, this is what my kids do, and they're being taught to act from the left to the right, not from the right to the left. And, you know, some of the silly things, the way they're teaching math now, for somebody to go all around the world to work a simple algorithm, is very, very confusing to kids. So we started paying attention because we had citizens and groups like you all who read and look at reports and look at things that are posted on websites that you know, foster education. You know, you all read Eagle Forum, and you read things from the Heritage Foundation, and you read things from Pioneer and Heartland, every conservative think tank in the United States has come against Common Core. The only think tank that has not come against Common Core is American Legislative Exchange Council. And it's really disappointing that they cannot make a decision. They say they're neutral, and the fact that Bill Gates gave them a pretty good sized check, I can't help but wonder if that has some bearing on the fact that every other conservative think tank in the United States has come out against Common Core except for ALEC. So, you know, that's real concerning to me, because Bill Gates has spread his money around everywhere to make sure that this thing flies. And that's a warning to me right there, that Bill Gates is that interested to get this agenda across to all the conservative states and the rest of the states. 5 states did not sign on to it in the beginning: Texas, Nebraska, Michigan, Virginia, and Alaska. I think Rick Perry was quoted as telling Arnie Duncan that Texas was not for sale. So these 5 states are going to make it just fine without Common Core. Some of your leaders in Mississippi don't agree with us. They say that the snowball has rolled too far down the hill and that we've gone too far to turn around. But in my opinion, it's never too late to do the right thing. Our kids are more important than anybody's political career, in my opinion. Our teachers are more important. They're tired of being jerked around. So you have to let your voices be heard. If you want this Common Core thing to be rolled back. Okay, Mike Pence in Indiana is the first governor that has signed a piece of legislation to halt it in his state. Tony Bennett got it started, got run out of Indiana because of it. Then he got a job down in Florida. Jeb Bush got him a job as superintendent down in Florida, and he just had to resign about a month ago because he got caught up in a little scandal when he was in Illinois. When he was in Indiana. So Mike Pence has set the bar in Indiana and showing other states that there is a way to get out of Common Core. The second way that the federal government got states to sign on to Common Core, besides the Race to the Top grant, was in allowing them to have a waiver from certain portions of No Child Left Behind. And that's number 6 and number 7 on this handout. The No Child Left Behind waiver gave the school board, the state school board, and it gave local school districts more flexibility in how to spend Title I federal funds. So of course they wanted that when they didn't have to be as accountable on spending the federal funds. And one of the best parts of No Child Left Behind, if there is a good part of it, was that if the school was not doing well and they were in what was called school improvement status, a parent got school choice. If there was another school in that district, like if there was one high school that was in school improvement, there was another high school in that district that was not, the parent got a letter, said you can send your child to this other school until this one moves back up and they're where they need to be. Well, one of the components of this waiver was there's no more school improvement status and no more school choice. They rearranged the way that schools are evaluated, and it's called differentiated recognition. So basically, one school, depending on the demographic makeup, can have a totally different accountability system than another school up the road. So you might have 2 reward schools, one reward school whose scores are in the 80s on a test, and one who's in the 60s, but they're both labeled as reward schools. So that is totally distorted, non-transparent, another way to throw a kink into how people can understand truly what's going on in education. So this waiver that the states jumped onto, Common Core, or a set of, quote, college and career ready standards, was another requirement to get the waiver. So they had it doubly covered. If you didn't sign up for Race to the Top and take the Common Core, then they were going to dangle this waiver down in front of you and say you can free up the way you spend your Title I funds, you can forget about school improvements, you don't have to send out a letter if your school's in the tank to let parents know so that they can send their kids somewhere else. So they got rid of some of the better parts of No Child Left Behind, in my opinion, with that waiver. And now, since all this has already happened, the Race to the Top grant's already happened, the No Child Left Behind waiver's already happened, do you think that the federal government is finished trying to manipulate and take over education? No. You look at number 9 on this sheet. The federal government is bypassing the state government and the state departments of education, going directly to the school districts with race to the top funding. So they're going individually to the school districts and say, you can compete for this money or you can get this if you will agree to do this, this, and this. So now they bypass the state board and they're going directly into the schools with their scheme, money for control. And of course, the school districts, there's some great administrators in the state of Mississippi, okay? But by and large, the name of the game, the state of Mississippi and most other places in education is how much money can I get?
That's right.
Okay? That is not the key to educational success. Y'all know that and I know that. I taught at a Christian school, didn't have any resources. The kids only paid $2,500 a year tuition. You know, I improved test scores quite a bit. My own daughters went from 74 to 90, and I wasn't teaching her the test. I was just teaching. You know, so I know that when it's taken on an average of 15,000 plus per pupil in the United States, and some of the finest private schools are, you know, less than $10,000 in Jackson, Mississippi, that we got waste. Administration has grown 700% in public education in the last 50 years. The teaching, the professional teaching staff, nor the students has grown in anywhere nearly the proportion that the administration has grown. So, unfortunately, the federal government knows that that's a great tool to try to get the administrations that are running schools to be able to do what they want them to do, is by giving them a little bit of money. And so there you have the scheme that the federal government has always used to get control. But this is so serious because once they get control of the schools, they have control of all the minds of the kids. And you all know that. You know, we need to be free to think in our own way. We don't need to be manipulated. We don't need to have subliminal messages coming out through test items, and we know that that's already here. We don't need messages coming, you know, to a certain political point of view through exemplary texts that are on lists for Common Core. We know we already have that. And if you go and read any of the discussion by the major players that was going on during the adoption of Common Core, you will find the words social equity, social reform, social justice, and you will also find that they want a trained workforce. It's not about formal education anymore. It is about a trained, one-size-fits-all workforce. And that's what Dr. Milgram said from Stanford. He said these standards will prepare a kid to enter a non-selective community college because basically it has destroyed the formal STEM content for math, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And that's what all the good math teachers are telling me that have contacted me, is this is just really, really ripping the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics component out of the high school math framework for our kids that want to go into engineering and what have you. Because basically Dr. Milgram said, you know, kids that come to Stanford, calculus is a remedial course for them. So, you know, if you're fixing high school to where a kid's not even going to take any type of calculus in the high school, then they're going to absolutely have to go straight on and take college algebra or intermediate algebra or whatever. And Dr. Milgram says these kids that want STEM careers need to be able to go in and straight to calculus or even skip a semester of calculus out of high school. They're not going to be able to do that. And, you know, there's not a tremendous amount of schools that teach that higher level of mathematics in Mississippi, but we need to continue to foster and protect the ones that are. Because Mississippians can do anything anybody else can do if the opportunity's out there. They keep touting the idea that we're on the bottom. We've got to change these standards because we're on the bottom. And that's, you know, I've gotten attacked at a meeting in Brookhaven by some educational establishment. People are like, well, where are we? You know, compared to other nations. Well, where is Mississippi? Well, if you look at educational studies, if you look at the Brookings Institute, did a great study, Tom Lovelace. The Brown Center for Education at the Brookings Institute, they nailed it. Their science can be repeated over and over again. You will come out with the same results. It's not like MAEP or it's not like the school accountability formula. What the Brookings Institute study says is the variation in National Assessment of Educational Progress scores on math and English across this nation, that there's much greater variation within the states than there is between the states. There's 4.5 times more variation within schools in the state of Mississippi than there is between the higher performing schools in in Mississippi as compared to a state like Massachusetts. So basically, our good schools in Mississippi that are being run correctly, that have good teachers, have good administrators, those schools' test scores can compare to anybody else in the state. But when you throw in the rest of the schools in the state of Mississippi, those scores that are not performing, then that's where you get the discrepancy within the state of Mississippi from one extreme to the other. And unfortunately, our tax money is paying just the same, a lot of times more. Some of the schools that we consolidated up in the Delta were spending over $13,000 per pupil on the school, in the schools. So the argument that common standards is going to raise our level of performance, well, the fact that Mississippi's had common standards since 2003, I think already negates that argument, because we have just as much discrepant performance in the state of Mississippi now as we did before 2003, whenever No Child Left Behind made us adopt common standards. So the standards argument does not hold water as far as good educational research. Now, if you want to get into emotionalism and, oh, we've got to raise our standards, we've got to raise our standards. Sandra Stotsky actually called out Mississippi as having one of the best syllabus programs in the nation for local Mississippi authors in English language arts, okay? Mississippi's supposed to be so bad at everything. Dr. Stotsky, who was on this validation committee, if you go and Google her, she's got an article that says what to do once we get rid of Common Core. She gives you a step-by-step process, and that's what we intend to do if we can get this through the legislature. Dr. Stotsky, in her reasoning and in her explanation to states as to what you need to do once you move past Common Core, she called out this little state of Mississippi that's always on the bottom as having an exemplary model for the nation to use on an English language arts class on local state authors. So if we're so bad at everything, then why is Dr. Stotsky using Mississippi's model as a model for the nation? That really made me feel good. I didn't know her. I had never spoken to her until a month or so ago, and she wrote this article before she had ever spoken to anybody in Mississippi, as far as I know. I think I'm probably the only person she's spoken to in Mississippi because I got in touch with her. But, you know, she even used us as an exemplary model for an English language arts class for local authors. So there's much hoopla to be made about Common Core. And if you even look at two studies, the Fordham Institute was paid by Bill Gates to do an evaluation and a comparison of each state's language arts and math standards as comparable to Common Core language arts and math standards. If you look at the analysis and evaluation of Mississippi standards from the Fordham Institute, who was the Common Core mouthpiece, the official people that are out there marketing it, that Gates has propped up, their evaluation of Mississippi's language arts and math standards is 360 degrees from the group that Mississippi Department of Education got in a contract with to align our standards to Common Core. Fordham said that our standards in English stunk, okay? But I question that when Dr. Stotsky used Mississippi's local authors course as a model for the nation. But while Fordham says that our language arts were among the worst in the nation, the group that MDE called in to align our standards to Common Core, called SEDL Comprehensive Center out of Georgia, their evaluation of our language arts standards said that they were equal and comparable rigor to Common Core, very closely aligned, and would not take much work. So, you know, to me that invalidates the argument right there when you got the Fordham Foundation saying one thing and then you got the folks that MDE hired saying another thing. And Fordham basically said our math is not that bad. Said I give Mississippi's math a C. They're strong in STEM content. There's a few things in the standards that need clarification, but by and large, Mississippi's math is not half bad. And I totally agree with that because I've taught chemistry. I put 2 kids through the public high schools. One just started at USM, one works out at NASA. And, you know, and then SEDL, the department contracted with, said that Mississippi's math standards were so bad they weren't even on the map, that they were nowhere near close to Common Core. So you see these conflicting comparisons from these educrat groups. So to me, that blows holes in the whole thing. You see all these conflicting studies and things. But my own interpretation, and my sister's been teaching for 20 years. I've got friends in the classroom. Teachers
by and large, most of them are scared to speak out because they fear retaliation. But there have been several math teachers that have confided in me, and there's even been some superintendents gone on the record that said we're not teaching this in our high schools because we're not ruining our college preparatory classes in our high school, especially math. So we're at a crossroads here. These 11 senators in the Mississippi Senate Conservative Coalition, they're listening to the people out there. We're doing everything we can to get a piece of legislation through that says we're going to halt Common Core, pending a cost analysis and a standards comparison. Whatever we can do to get it halted. We have a plan to replace Common Core. All we have to do is take Mississippi's current standards that we've been using, and we can have those standards certified college and career ready by one of our institutions of higher learning. And Dr. Stotsky suggests that we take the legislature, picks the folks from the universities, and picks the folks from the high schools to work on to tweak and upgrade Mississippi standards. I personally don't think Mississippi standards are too bad because I know people that are going into the career fields that have been taught in Mississippi high schools, and they're competing with anybody. You know, you all know it's the environment that you're in. The standards really never make their way down into an environment in the classroom. You can change the standards all day long, but if you don't have a good environment in the classroom, it's not going to really matter. So our good schools are doing very well. We've got some terrible schools in the state of Mississippi. These standards are not going to change that. They're going to cost somebody a lot of money. And that person that's going to cost a lot of money is going to be you all sitting out here. Because in some shape, form, or fashion, if we don't get this thing halted, you're going to pay for it. And I believe with all my heart you're never going to see any positive results. Now they can skew these tests, they can manipulate the cut scores on these tests, they can make them look bad, they can make them look good. And we'll never know the difference. And that's because I understand the inner workings of it, because I've done it, I've been in it, and I've studied testing. I pay very close attention to how these standardized tests are set up and how the cut scores are done. If they look at them and they think that they're too low, then they'll just raise the cut scores a little bit or lower the cut scores a little bit. So they'll have this many kids performing on this level. That all can be adjusted. So we really don't have any accurate way of knowing how we're doing on anything except the National Assessment for Educational Progress, because it's been in existence for so long. And people pretty much know how that thing is scored and evaluated. So we already have a method of comparing our states against each other on that particular test. It's given randomly to 4th and 8th graders. And the last point I want to bring up is the fact that the states that did not sign on to Common Core should not have any penalty. Agree? You know, this was supposed to be voluntary, state-led and voluntary. So the states that didn't sign up for it shouldn't have any repercussions. Well, the architect of Common Core happened to be a man named David Coleman. David Coleman worked for a group called Achieve. Achieve had a huge role in developing and working and developing these standards. The first thing, once this got going, was David Coleman, through his connections with the Department of Education and with the Gates Foundation and these two testing consortiums, he got put in the position of president or chairman, whatever you want to call it, of the National College Board. Okay, so we had David Coleman put in the chairmanship of the National College Board. David Coleman's first act as chairman of the National College Board was to say, well, guess what? It's time to rewrite the ACT and the SAT test to align them to Common Core standards. So when have we ever had to align an ACT or an SAT to a certain set of standards or a certain way of teaching or a certain way of testing? So what he did in that one act was he affected all 5 states that did not sign on to Common Core. He affected every private, every religious, every homeschooler. Every kid in this nation is impacted because of the decision made by David Coleman to rewrite the ACT and the SAT. And my advice to folks that have their kids in homeschool programs or Christian programs or whatever, don't change what you're teaching your kids. You know, hopefully this fad will come and go. That's what I'm hoping and praying. But that was their way to force everybody, okay, not just public schools, but to force everybody to move toward this Common Core curriculum and to participate in this testing from these two consortiums so that it would hit everybody. No stone would be unturned, okay? They have no business doing anything that affects private education. They have no business doing anything that affects your loss of control, whether your kid's in a public school, private school, homeschool. It is still your responsibility to educate your child. You should have some input. You should know what's going on. Well, there's no way that you know what your kids are being taught because already, prior to Common Core, majority of kids don't have textbooks. So if they're learning on the computer, if they're learning from a worksheet or whatever, you don't know what they're learning while they're in school. If you don't see their textbook and you don't see where they are, then you really don't have a good idea of what they're being taught in school, okay? Can a first grader come home and give you a total idea if they're being indoctrinated in the schools? I don't think so. I mean, you look at some of the sample questions from these tests, some were about Christopher Columbus and different things, and, you know, there's enough that I've seen that my hair is wanting to stand up, like I, you know, stand on end. That's how alarmed I am about this. And, you know, I'm certainly not the smartest person in the world. I'm certainly not as smart as Chris McDaniel. But my gut and my heart tells me, and what knowledge that I have in my head tells me that this is bad. And that this is the last nail in the coffin to put certain ways of thinking and to channel our kids into a certain way of behaving through the schools. Because, you know, the beauty of education is it's different here and there. Regionalism, you know, culture. The fact that Common Core says that we can only teach 30% of literature, true literature, in high schools and only 50% in elementary school, that we have to use informational text like training manuals, executive orders, junk on global warming, all kind of stuff's on the list of suggested informational text. When you take out classic literature out of a curriculum to that extent, or out of the standards to that extent, what are you doing? You're diluting the cultural heritage of a region, a state, and a country. If you study this, you will see so many facets of dilution of American culture. If you love your country and you're trying to fight to keep your country despite the Obamacare and everything else, you will fight this. Because it's very, very evident in many, many facets if you begin to study this, that there is an agenda here, an absolute agenda. And it's not totally to make our kids perform better on national tests or international tests. And one reason why America does not do as well on some of these international tests, most nations don't test their special education students. We do. We test all but 5% of our kids test. So we have different ways of doing things in some of these other countries. And I agree that our school system, we're in trouble. But we don't need a national de facto school board run through Arnie Duncan to help us out. We take care of our own business. School is not an issue that the federal government, there's still laws that keep the federal government from getting into curriculum. But they have backdoored it through these bodies, through these other bodies, and funded these other bodies to get one step removed from totally doing it through the federal government. But it's still the same effect. So that's kind of where we are with Common Core. And, you know, I don't believe it's too late to stop it. I really don't. And that's, you know, we're going to try to get the folks to back up that don't really understand it. Quit listening to the propaganda, quit drinking the Kool-Aid, and really look at what this is. You know, there's nothing out there that proves that this is going to do anything to improve our public schools. That's my spiel for the day, and I care about the kids. I've been in the classroom, I've raised 2 kids, got a grandbaby that I'm most concerned about. And another thing I'm real concerned about is we're raising a generation of illiterate children because they can't read or write cursive. There's no need in the schools anymore to read or write cursive. Now, what do you think about that? They can't read the founding documents. If they got in a situation where the way to save their life was to read something that was written in cursive, they'd just be out of luck, because the Common Core, and even prior to Common Core, we're moving away from cursive. So what are we going to do? Scan their finger, put an X instead of them signing their name? I mean, we need to wake up and figure out what is going on with our kids in education. You know what's best for your kids. The folks running the schools don't know what's best for your kids. You know. So you got to get involved if you got kids and grandkids. Yes.
Children, we know